Hello, and welcome to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. I'm Jim Paolino, founder and CEO of Lodestar Software Solutions. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to leaders in the mortgage and real estate industries. Our goal is to talk about current events, interesting things from their end of the industry, and anything else that we feel is fascinating. So our very first guest today is my good friend, Matt Einheber, creator of Titlebox, and so much more. Matt, you've been in the lending industry, the title industry. I'm probably forgetting about three or four. So would love to kind of start there. What types of things have you done in the lending industry, especially since you're probably still on the young side for mortgage after being in it for 20 plus years?
Depends on what you call young or how you define that. But it's weird because then to say like, I've been doing this for 15 years or whatever, you throw that around and you're like, what? I've been doing something for 15 years? How's that possible? I came into the lending space when I started an ATM company actually when I was like college aged. So I guess that's financial services in the late 90s when, that was private ATMs were like a new idea. That was a very small but a successful kind of thing, and started selling mortgages. I was in my 20s and just got a job, and that evolved to I saw as a salesman, as a loan officer, just holes in the settlement services side of the business, title and everything that revolved around it. Knew nothing about it, and left that company, to go start my own thing in the settlement services space and in the title space, which had several iterations and evolved into a title agency that I grew over multiple states, and ran for the better part of 15 years, and then a couple of years ago, 3 years ago or so, started Titlebox. To solve a lot of the problems that I learned and kind of pulled apart and saw in that space. And then within the last year, sold my title agency so that I could solely focus on Titlebox. So that's the sort of brief history of me.
And I think that's one of the several things that we have in common, in addition to being in Philadelphia, is being kind of reformed title agents who made the switch over to the technology of vendor space.
Yeah, it's like the title agency space is, it's a great business and it's a really tough business. And it's a changed business. Even in the, since I started in the business in the early 2000s, it's changed dramatically, fundamentally, I think. And obviously some of those things are long-term systemic things and some of the reason that I got into Titlebox and that I see, but if you're, if you see some of that change and you want to effectuate it, folks like you and me, we dive into crazy, we're idiots. We dive into things that we try.
Well, that actually gets to my next question of what's made you want to stick around in all this, different aspects of the industry.
It's a puzzle, I found myself, a little bit bored with just, selling insurance and, that it wasn't enough. So, but there is certainly a puzzle. And I think fortunately, and for a long time, I'm like, boy, I picked this industry that's so hard to pull apart. The hardest part was really the human dynamics around like the disconnect of like the person who buys your thing isn't the person who pays for it. The person who chooses doesn't pay for it. And it creates all these weird dynamics. But I think that at the end of the day, that it was perfect for me because it was this very complicated puzzle that I had to solve. And that's what we're doing. We're not, honestly, like if you do something and you become successful and then you make money, say, right? And we all want to make money. And then you get the money and then you're like, cool, now I have money. And it's nice to have money. Don't get me wrong. I'm not allergic to money, but it's like, it's not the thing that keeps you kind of going. You got to find the right puzzle for yourself. And so, and this is a tough one, man. Title is a really, really hard. It doesn't seem hard. We're not saving lives here, but there's human dynamics about it that I find to be different and more challenging to sort of pull apart than I've seen in any other industry.
Well, one of the things that really interests me, and I really want to touch on in this podcast, is lending touches every aspect of the economy, people's lives. Everyone needs a place to live. The housing industry, the real estate industry, you can talk to anyone and they will have something to say about it. And I think that's been really interesting because it's just so important and it affects so many aspects of our economy and people's lives. And I guess, we've talked in the past about when someone buys a car, how easy it can be. And that's the second largest purchase of people's lives typically. But housing has never gotten close to that in terms of what you can do online, how modernized, quote unquote, everything is. So how do you see that changing? Have you seen it changing in the last year? Probably kicking and screaming.
Yeah, I mean, specifically, like, what's happened over the last, I would say probably 6 or 7 years, is that there's been a lot of outside, people kind of like discovered, the settlement services title, like, aha, there's this gold mine of sort of old manual processes. We're going to go make our $1 billion here because we went to Harvard and we're smart. And it's way more complicated than that. I think inherently inside of the business, one of the challenges of like, well, why can't Bitcoin or why can't a blockchain solve these problems?
Right.
Or, there's lots of potential solutions. But I think, inherently what happens is you've got states and municipalities and, so the borough of Main Street says, you know what, we want to charge a library tax and like, let's create, and then we're going to make it liable against real estate so that we collect it. And here are the rules, and we're going to create the rules. And those rules are just specific to the borough of Main Street, not the rest of the world.
Yep.
And so the municipalities are incentivized and they're disincentivized from from making things open and clear and being part of a blockchain. Like there's a lot of reasons. That's just one little glimpse of why that blockchain sounds simple if you're solving the problem of the chain of ownership.
Right.
That's not actually the problem, and that's not actually the most complex part of title. I mean, I'm talking title. We're talking, we started with lending, and I'm getting a little bit more drilled down. But there are lots of things I think that blockchain can solve, just as an example. And there's lots of. But again, the challenge is a legacy system. If you could start a new country from scratch, like that's a different story. But we're not. That's not what we get to do. We have to deal with what we have.
When people make a comment about the industry being stuck in the 20th century, honestly, in some cases, this is stuck in the 19th century. I grew up in Rhode Island, smallest state in the country, and they still have individual town recording offices. Just something like that. Rhode Island has 1 million people in it. There's one office could cover that whole damn state. Like there's just things like that, and you're not changing that anytime quick. You can say the same thing about Connecticut, Pennsylvania. The system there is all over the place. So I don't think these are easy things to change. And I think people are very quick to paint a broad brush of, title insurance is going to be obsolete, or this is like, life insurance if no one died. It's highway robbery. It's something you don't know you need until you really need it.
Yeah, I think the industry itself, including mortgage lending and real estate sales and all the things that touch the whole process. It's legacy system stuff, right? Like there's a difference in anything that you can come in and say, well, this is how it should be. Well, there's a lot of things how they should be, but like, what can you actually effectuate and change and actually do? And that's often a completely different story because there's so many moving parts and variables inside of there. And this industry has a phenomenal amount of moving parts and variables. And everybody has motivation. Crazy.
I grew up in a family-owned title company, and I really need to find this picture. It's something that my dad always had in his office. It showed a bunch of people in a rowboat, kind of like like we see here on the Schuylkill River, where everyone's about ready to row, and it had little blurbs over everyone saying attorney ready, title agent ready, appraiser ready, realtor ready, bank ready, borrower ready, and then the person says go, and then everyone bangs into each other, and it's just a pile. So I really have been meaning to find that because I think it just sums up the closing process so well. But specifically in the last year, have you seen any meaningful change towards kind of modifying, especially the closing process, especially now that you can't come into the office in the same way that people would?
Yes, but it's so disparate, meaning like, and this is inherent, like everyone's trying to solve their own problem. You know what I mean? Like their own little problem. Like what people see and feel in touch, for example, is the settlement. And they're like, well, we're going to have electronic settlements and you're going to sign on a pad and you're not going to physically be at the table anymore. And that's great. And there's been some meaningful change there in the last year, forced by the events of 2020. That, so that's happening more. It's not happening at the level that it should be still. And it's still slow moving, but it's definitely been accelerated. And I think that that's very good. And so, you've seen that, but that's like, the tip of the iceberg. Right. I mean, that's such a, like, that is 2.5% maybe of all the work that's done in the entire process, is sitting there at the table. So like, it's helpful and it touches the consumer. That's what they see and feel. It's probably 50% of the work that they do or whatever. So it's meaningful, because it touches the consumer, but it's one tiny little piece. And so, yeah, you've seen things like that, e-recording, which was already very prevalent almost everywhere. Anyway, the few places that were left have pretty much gotten on board there. So there's been like things, that RON, remote online notarization, like there's been individual things, but I mean, this whole, if you look at the whole workflow, it's not just a workflow, it's multiple work. Right. Because the workflow is really like, hi, honey, hey, let's think about buying a house. And then it ends with, we're moving in. And so everything that happens in that 1 to 2 year process, mortgage and appraisal and title and this and that, and then each one of those has their own little workflows, and each one of those has their own little workflows. Right. So there's been things, but it's tough to
and I think to your point too of that start, there's still a lack of understanding that people have of all the different pieces of the process. And I think regardless of the technology, making that understanding better and educating the consumer, it seems like people aren't really investing in that in the way they should. I got a call this week from a good friend of mine. He knows I'm do something related to the lending industry. And he said, hey, Jim, I'm buying a house. I had some questions for you about what I do. So I was asking, and he had got a pre-approved. He's like, yeah, I got pre-approved by a lender. So what do I do next? And I was talking to him. I was like, you need to find a house. Like that was like, I can't really help you until you actually figure out. So you might want to talk to a realtor. You might want to do this. And smart guy. I have another friend. He has a master's in finance, and he talked to me when he was in the process. He's like, "Oh, I didn't pick my title agent. The seller just told me who to use and how much I'm going to pay." And I was like, "That's not really how this is supposed to work." So the lack of understanding of anywhere in the process is just really interesting.
Nobody to be that voice because it's not one thing. There's 42 different industries by this process, and all of them have their own agenda. And so, and I get frustrated a lot, specifically at the title industry, because I think that they, the voice of the title industry is not only, I don't want to say it's so bad at expressing its value proposition. It's not even so bad at it. They have not ever expressed their value proposition to the world. And so
they protect the American dream.
Yes, well, that's it.
But what does that mean, right? Like, yeah.
But they really don't. Like, I don't think that I know for a fact, because I've spoken to hundreds of and title companies and people in the industry, big and small. I don't think they really are truly understand, or at least I don't agree with what their actual real value proposition is. And so how can you express it if you don't really, if you haven't verbalized it very well? And so, and people, the public doesn't understand it. Right. And they think that it's like, oh, you make sure I'm buying the house from the right person. That's it. Like, that doesn't sound very hard. And you're right, it's not. So, but that's not really what's going on. And so how can someone value you if you yourself can't even express what the actual value is that you're bringing?
And I think, aside from just title everywhere in the industry, a lot of these things are commoditized, right? I think the rates you're getting somewhere aren't going to be drastically different. The title premiums in many states can't be different at all. So you're literally going to be paying the same price regardless of where you go. So companies focus inwardly on technology of let me lower my costs, let me do anything to make this as cheap as possible to maximize what I'm making. But what I think is being missed, especially in this kind of e-closing and technology push, is this, in my opinion, is always going to be a relationship business.
Well, a commodity service is different than a commodity product, right? If I buy a share, if I buy this thing, right, at the end of the day, I get the same. It's the thing is the thing is the thing. If it's the same, the same thing, it doesn't really matter where I bought it. But if I paint my house, that's a commodity too, right? My wall is now a different color, period, the end. But the process and experience of the painter didn't show up on time, and this guy took a week, and the other person took 2 months. Like, there's a lot that can go into that service, and there is a reason why you get 5 estimates, and you don't pick the cheapest one, and you don't pick the most expensive one generally, right? So people understand it in that context, I think, mostly, and they understand this: buy the product that's the same in this context. But they're taking a service, a mortgage loan, an experience of shopping for and buying a house,
Right. Mm-hmm.
Title, and all the things that go inside of that are really, it's a lot more like picking a painter for your house than it is like buying the product that's the same. And people don't think, they treat it like a commodity product, and the industry treats themselves like a commodity product when really it's a commodity service, and those should be purchased in a different way.
I like that analogy, right? Two people can use the same bucket of paint and lead to very different results.
Very different results. Yeah. And even if at the end of the day, the results are the same, the wall's the same, the job is equivalently as good, your path in getting there isn't necessarily the same, right? And we've all had contractors, as using that as an example, to work on our house, where like it's been a nightmare, and then you get the great person and they're like, this was worth paying more for, everyone kind of can usually relate to something like that.
Well, what changes do you see coming going forward, and is there room for people to change this industry? There's always been almost the doom and gloom of, blockchain's going to make title obsolete, or Amazon is going to be a mortgage company along with Walmart, and all these little mortgage brokers aren't going to be there anymore. As long as I've been in the industry, there's always been that threat of things getting rolled up. Yet there's more and more companies every day. So how do you kind of balance those two thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm Mr. like big picture, forward thinking. I'm Mr. Efficiency, right? I want least movements, and blockchain's not taking over title. And like we saw in 2014 and 15, like the Quickens of the world started to really eat up then that reversed itself, right? And went backwards, and now brokers are much more popular than ever. I think that I've learned like efficiency isn't always big company efficiency, technology, and straight lines aren't always the best thing for every situation. They often are, and everyone has to work to get better. But also, I think that you're right. There's relationships, and there's people that make choices, consumers that make choices that aren't based on better, faster, cheaper always, or even logic always. So there's lots of reasons why people go in different directions, but there's definitely evolution. I just think that there's bucket. I mean, like what we're working on at Titlebox and what we're doing and delivering is a very like guy behind the guy kind of solution, right? That's driving efficiencies and then enabling of a whole industry that like the consumer doesn't necessarily see, though they feel it. But yeah, I mean, I think that mortgage brokers are doing it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think that realtors, I mean, you're seeing in the real estate sales space, how many new models have shown up in the last couple of years? It seems like now there was only one way to sell real estate, 6% commission. Now there's I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7 models, and the iBuyer thing. Everybody, oh my God, it's going to take over. And now that's starting to
I was about to say iBuyers were taking over the industry, and then they weren't, and then they were again, and it's just like everything else. This all kind of goes in ups and downs, and I've certainly seen that growing up in the industry. I saw my family's title company, I think, drop by about 80% in terms of their number of employees almost overnight in 2008. Yep. And I think a lot of what you're doing with Titlebox, and a lot of what I would love for you to talk about, is how do you deal with the ups and downs of that industry? And that's one of the things that me at Lodestar is always concerned about, is what happens when volume triples overnight and then goes back down, like an experience we're dealing with right now. Like, how can you manage in an environment where you're going to be 3 times as busy in June as you are in January?
It's really tough. And traditionally in the title space, specifically the mortgage space too, for that matter. I think that space going up to the same thing in 2000. I mean, you saw this, and then and traditionally it's been a one-sided, not very nice relationship of these companies hiring human beings as the capital labor, and then they don't need them, they got to get rid of them. And I understand the business decision. I mean, what do you but it's less than ideal for everybody involved. And so how do you solve that problem? I mean, one of the things that we're doing is I don't want to say it's a side effect, because it's an effect of what we're doing in Titlebox, is solving that a bit, for title companies. I mean, how do you go? First of all, the labor pool, the supply demand is completely out of balance, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon. I mean, I think the demand is going to continue to outstrip supply in experienced title professionals,
Mm-hmm.
period. Like, and right now the demand is extremely high. Even when
Right.
that demand settles down a little, the supply is just getting lower and lower. You're just chasing it. So
Yeah, I mean, who grows up and wants to be an appraiser or even a loan officer or title agent, a title searcher, any of those things? And
they're not visible,
right.
Professions. So it's not like,
Mhm.
some people grow up and they're like, you can see a truck driver, a hairdresser, a doctor, a lawyer. And so you're like, oh, I want to do that. And then you go to school and you do.
Yeah.
This is not visible. So people don't even understand that it exists. So there's
Mhm.
no like natural flow of people into the space. And it requires a lot of training, and that training doesn't exist for that very
Right.
reason. So it's just experienced stuff. So, for us, it's like, all right, you need to run a business that's not just a collective of artists and hope to get lucky and get good people. That's not a
Mhm.
business. That's like,
Yeah.
so we technology is a mix of data and software technology and human beings that operate it, but do so in a way where those human beings, we can take the people who know what they're doing, teach them better,
Right.
have them focus on making decisions and not just, not doing administrative work that wastes, and then turn ratios from, instead of one person every 20, 30, 40 transactions, one person every 300 transactions,
Mhm.
because we've used the other stuff.
Well, then more important, it allows those people to have a higher leverage point in the transaction. They can talk to the customer, they can talk to the other decision makers, opposed to data entry or anything else. I had a prospect once who I spoke with, and I was telling him about our software and what we were doing and how we could save him time. And he said, "Oh, that's all well and good, but what are my employees supposed to do then with all that time saving? Just scratch their backs all day?" He didn't use the word backs, but that I think that mindset is a problem because
Yeah.
there are plenty of things that they can do, right? Or, let's figure out how people can have that direct interaction and use technology to help the people component, opposed to just lowering your cost and that sort of thing. So I really think there's always going to be a spot for small companies in this industry, because this is going to be a people business and always will be, because you're dealing with the most important transaction of people's lives in most
I
cases.
agree. I agree 1,000%. I mean, there's a couple things there to unpack, but one of the things, like, yeah, I mean, your employees, when they're looking up, they're trying to quote rates, what they're not doing? They're not talking to client. When your employees are
Right.
chasing down the judgment or trying to get a payout from work, they're not
Yeah.
talking to customers. Well, the customers are still talking to them. They said,
Yeah.
so the response time is poor. And so they could be getting new business by addressing customer facing kind of activities. But yeah, I mean, there's,
And as a millennial, I can tell you that we don't want to do everything on our phones, and what we really want to do is talk to someone who's an expert and have them guide us through the entire process. Because whoever is able to do that you will be their person. Because we will go to them with any questions, we'll go back to them. Because to your point, we know that person will do a great job painting our house. Whatever, if the paint with him costs a little bit more than down the street, that's fine. Let's pay for peace of mind.
I think people take for granted. You hear a lot these days, like, well, why can't I just buy a house like on my phone? Like, why can't I just do this and go through the whole process? And there's even some companies out there that are like, yeah, you're gonna be able to do. And it's so not that simple, and is not close to being that simple. And I think that's smoke and mirrors to even suggest that it's going to be that simple. And so I agree with you that, like, as long as it's not that simple, people need human beings that they connect with, like, to help them, guide them through. And so as long as that exists, we're going to, there's room for human beings, period.
Well, that actually gets me to my last question. If you were, real estate czar of the country, able to make any sweeping change that you wanted, and I didn't send you this ahead of time, so get excited. If you could make 1 to 3 just blanket changes to help improve how the industry is running, what would it be?
Oh boy.
Yeah, I should have said that ahead of time, but I'd like to see
Yeah,
you sweat
you
a
should
little
have said
bit.
that ahead of time, and not because I don't know what to say, but because I have to be very careful about my words, because there's buckets of this industry that I don't want to throw under the bus.
Yeah.
But 1 to 3 changes. I mean, so I would first look at the 3 major components to the process as far as consumers, which is the sales process, the purchase process, real estate sales, the lending process, your lender and that experience, And the title process was such a major process, even though consumers don't see it, feel, touch, or understand it. And so, how do you solve for those three things? And I would pull them up and make them more transparent. You know what I mean? And let the process. I would let the logistical process engineers run the process, run the play, not the salespeople. And I think that it's not fair to the salespeople, real estate salespeople, that the industry and the consumers and everybody else kind of puts it on them to make the call about not just the sale, but beyond that, the transaction, getting to the table, and all these parts. That it's not really their job, and it's not part of what they do, but they're relied upon and looked at as the quarterback of that. And it's not really fair to them. They don't want to relinquish talk to this person and talk to that. Right. So I think that the process should be driven by the process engineers, the loan, the mortgage process engineers, the title process engineers, telling kind of sales like, all right, great, you brought the sale in, now this is what we do. And instead of the other way around, sales dictating the processes, which happens a lot in this industry, not so much in others. And I think that kind of makes it a more confusing transaction than it needs to be for consumers.
I like that. That's a great answer with absolutely zero preparation. Matt, thanks again for coming on today. If anyone else out there wants to contact you, what's the easiest way to get in touch?
Yeah, if you're a title agent and want to sell, we can help operations. Our company is called Titlebox. We are at Titlebox.com. And that's the best way to find us, learn a little bit about what we do and how we help title companies, title operations, operates, expand, scale, better, faster, cheaper in so many ways. And that's where you can find us.
Great. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. Please like and subscribe wherever you get this podcast. If you have any ideas for upcoming episodes or would like to be a guest, please reach out to us at lendingleaders@lssoftwaresolutions.com. Hope to hear from you.